Okay, so let me start. First, I want to make some advertisements. It's possible to have nice pictures of the objects I'm describing in these lectures. I'm not going to show you the pictures because this afternoon there is a lecture by Nicolas Curien. It's the first lecture this afternoon, and I encourage you to go to this lecture to see the pictures, the simulations. Okay. Okay, so another thing I want to say, if you want to have more details about what I said yesterday and what I will say today, you can look at this paper. It's a kind of lecture notes of a course I gave with Grégory Miermont. It does not contain all the results I will talk about tomorrow and on Thursday, but at least everything I did yesterday and everything I will do today, you can find it with more details in this reference. So it's easy to find it. You can just find my web page. It's on my web page. Just in case you want to see more detailed proofs. Okay, so yesterday we did a lot of combinatorics. Today it will be more probabilistic. But still I want to comment a little bit on the last result I explained yesterday, which was this bijection between trees with labels and quadrangulations. Okay. So essentially, I've shown you again an example of how the bijection works. So I guess you can see the tree in white lines here. Okay. So as usual, you could give a name to the vertices of the tree. This is always the root. The empty set, these are the children, 1, 2, 3, and so on. It continues this way. And so it's a labeled tree. So this means that we have, in addition to the tree structure, we have labels, I call them LV here, assigned to the vertices of the tree. In such a way, if you remember well, that the root here always has label 0. Okay, and when you cross an edge, when you move along an edge of the tree, the labels can change in absolute value by at most 1. Okay, so starting from a vertex from label 0, if you look at its children, say, they can have label 0 or -1 or +1. Okay, these are the only possibilities. Okay. Okay, and then how do we construct the bijection? This is what I explained yesterday. So basically, we look at every corner of the tree. So corners are angular sectors between two successive edges around a vertex. And from each corner, we draw a red edge here. So you should distinguish, of course, the white edges, which are the edges of the tree, and the red edges, these will be the edges of the quadrangulation. So from each corner of the tree, we draw a red edge which connects this corner, for instance, the corner I'm considering here is this one, to the next corner with a label, well, the label you start from -1. Okay, so for instance, here we have label 0. We draw this edge to this corner here with label -1. Okay, and for instance, here I have a corner of the root. We connect this corner to the next corner with label -1, which is here. Okay. So something I did not say yesterday, but which is of course important, is that you can draw all these red edges in such a way that they do not cross. Okay. Okay, and also they, in fact, they also do not cross the white edges, but this is less important. Okay, so what we get is really a planar map. A planar map is an embedding of a graph. When I say embedding, it means that the edges are not allowed to cross, of course. Okay. Another remark which I did not do yesterday, that you have two end corners in the tree. Well, if tau has, say, n edges. It has 2 end corners, and since you draw a red edge starting from each corner, well, you get also 2 n red edges. Okay, so which is normal if I want to gain a quadrangulation with n faces. We saw yesterday as a consequence of Euler's formula, for instance, that it must have 2 n edges. Okay, and the same for the number of vertices. Here you see vertices of the tree, they become vertices of the quadrangulation. And so you have n plus 1 vertices in the tree. So you get here n plus 1 also vertices of the quadrangulation. But you remember that we added this extra vertex partial d. Okay, so this is needed, this extra vertex, because when you have a corner with minimal label, here in this example, the minimal label is -1. Well, we connect this corner to this vertex partial d. If you want, I could have assigned label -2, the minimal label -1 to this vertex, okay, just to keep the same rule here, but it's not necessary. Okay, so here you get n plus 1 vertices for Q, but of course you have plus the extra label partial d. So in the end you get n plus 2 vertices. Which is also something we saw yesterday. When you have n faces, you have n plus 2 vertices, okay, which is just normal. Okay, so these are just minor comments. Maybe I want to say something more important for what follows. Well, something I should probably say is, okay, why is it a bijection? Why does it work? Why do you get, for instance, a quadrangulation here? So I'm not going to explain that in detail. Well, you can see it in this particular instance here. I think it's a bit different from the one that I showed yesterday, but you can check that every face has degree 4. It's also true for this face here. You see, it's the case I mentioned yesterday when you have an edge such that both sides are incident to the same face. You count it twice in the degree. So this face here has degree 2 plus 1 plus 1. It's also it also has degree 4. Okay, so all faces here has degree 4. You can check that very easily. So, but why does it work? So something you may notice here is that inside each face of the red graph, there is exactly one white edge. Okay, so take for instance this one, the face of the red quadrangulation. There is just this white edge here. In this face here, you have this white edge and so on. Even for the external one, you have this white edge here. Okay. So in the way I draw the picture, you see that, in fact, edges of the tree correspond to faces here. Okay, it's also, well, it's also why you have n faces, because you have n edges here. Okay, so the idea is that when you do the construction, when you take any edge of the tree, the construction will associate with this edge a face. How can you see that? I'm not going to see that in general, but consider, for instance, an edge such that its vertices. So somewhere here you have the root, okay, of the tree, and so you have many things like that. Maybe you have vertices above like this also, and more vertices. Okay. But consider this particular edge here, and assume that the labels of the vertices corresponding to this edge are k and say k minus 1. Okay, it's a particular case because it could be k and k or k and k plus 1. But let's just look at that example. So in the way I construct here the red graph, the red quadrangulation, I draw all these red edges, and for instance, there is one that that corresponds to the last corner before this edge, okay? A corner corresponding to this vertex, but just the angular sector on the left of this edge, if you want. And there, what I do, I draw an edge from this vertex, this corner, to the next k-1, so I draw this edge, in fact, okay? Necessarily. Okay, so then what do I do? Now I'm going to look at the last corner of this vertex before the edge that's going down here, okay? So similarly, I will draw an edge here from a certain vertex here with label k-2. Okay? Because this is the rule. Yeah? Okay. Now, if I look at the first corner corresponding to this vertex after this edge, I also draw an edge, but now to the next k-1, which is maybe, let's say maybe, for instance, it is here. Okay? Okay, so I arrive now at another vertex there. And now, so here I arrive in a certain corner. And, well, I can also start an edge from this corner, and it will go to the next k-2. Okay. And if you think a little bit, the next k-2 has to be this one. It cannot be another vertex before, because this would contradict the fact that this one here was the first k-2 after this one, okay? So it has to go to this one here. And you see here, you obtain a face of your quadrangulation, which contains this white edge, okay? And it's not hard to see that in the construction, you do not draw, well, it's the fact that edges cannot cross. You will not draw other edges inside this face, okay? So this is really a quadrangle, okay? So I treated a particular case of an edge here, k-1, but you can treat the other cases in a similar way. And so you can check. So this argument shows you that the red graph that you obtain here is indeed a quadrangulation. Okay? You just look at all possible cases. There are not many. And you realize that you get a quadrangulation. All faces are quadrangles. Okay? Okay, so of course this does not tell you that you have a bijection. It tells you only that this mapping from the white tree to the red graph maps labeled trees into quadrangulations with the number of faces equal to the number of edges. Now, if you want to show it's a bijection, well, there's something you can notice is the fact that the two sets here have the same cardinality. So why is it true? Well, I remember I used the notation capital Tn for the set of all these objects here. Okay. And it's quite easy to compute the cardinality of capital Tn, okay? Because, so I had also a notation, this will be useful. Okay? For script capital Tn, this was a set of all plane trees with n edges. So this means I consider just the tree structure. I don't consider the labels, okay? So it's very easy to see that the cardinality of Tn is the set is equal to 3 to the power n, the cardinality of script capital Tn. So because if you are given the tree, how many choices do you have for the labels? Okay? So you must always start with label 0 at the root, but then each time you cross an edge, you have 3 possibilities. Okay? The label can increase by +1, 0, or -1. Okay? This is my rule. Okay? So you have, for each edge, you have 3 possibilities for the variation of the labels along this edge. Okay? So because you have n edges, the total number of possibilities for the labels, okay, so will be exactly 3 to the power n. Okay? And this is true for any tree with n edges, so you get this relation. And now, it's a very classical fact that the number of plane trees is equal to the Catalan number of order n. Okay? So you get this formula. And again, I forgot to say something. To get a bijection, oh, okay. I had already forgotten it yesterday, so you need also to have a sign, okay? A sign which is epsilon equal +1 or -1, okay? And then what you construct here is, okay, I should have been more precise. It's in fact a rooted and pointed quadrangulation with n faces. Well, this is not very important, but to be precise, I should mention it. This is used only to decide the orientation of the root edge. The root edge is always the red edge that starts from the first corner here of empty set. And I have two choices for the orientation, and I use this epsilon to make this choice, okay? But it's important because here I need to multiply by 2, in fact, okay? Okay, because I have two choices for epsilon here, okay? Okay, so there is a 2 here also. And in fact, we saw yesterday that I had this notation Qn dot for the set of all rooted and pointed quadrangulations with n faces. And we saw yesterday that, in fact, the cardinality of this set is the same as this one, okay? So I just gave you the formula yesterday. Well, it has been proved by really combinatorial methods, some calculations of generating functions. In fact, if you know directly that this is a bijection, you can recover this formula, which is not at all trivial, in fact. Okay. So you know that the two sets have the same cardinality. So in order to get that this is a bijection, you need only verify that it is injective, that it is one-to-one. Okay, and okay, this can be done, but.
Yesterday you told that this non-trivial formula would follow from this bijection.
Yeah. I agree with you, and now I'm using it. Yeah. So you can do it use it in both directions. I mean, if you prove that this is a bijection, which I have not done completely, then you recover this non-trivial formula. Yeah. Okay. But if you know this formula, it makes it easier to prove that it is a bijection. No, I'm cheating clearly, but but okay. Okay, so one last thing I want to say about this, maybe there are two more things, and then we'll do something different. Well, something that's going to be important, okay, so yesterday I also mentioned the property of distances, which appears in this bijection, which is that if you look at the graph distance between a vertex here, well, this distinguished vertex partial D and any other vertex V. So V can be viewed as well as a vertex of Q or a vertex of tau because of this identification here. And this is given by the label of V minus the minimal of all labels plus 1. And I explained yesterday how we can obtain this formula. And in fact, there is something more which I want to mention, which is that you really can construct geodesics from any point here of any vertex of Q to this vertex partial D in really in a very simple way using the construction. So maybe I can write it here. Geodesic from V to partial D. How do you do it? Well, let's say, for instance, this is your vertex V here. Okay, for instance. Okay, so you start from any corner of V. So in my example, well, there is just one corner here, so not much choice. But you know that there is an edge from V to the next corner, okay, or vertex, if you prefer, with label LV minus 1. So it's this edge here, okay? And then you iterate. And, I've arrived at a certain corner here of a vertex. If I want, I can start again from this corner here, where I arrived, and I look for the next corner with smaller label. That's going to be this one. Okay. So I arrive here at a certain corner of the root, which has labeled now the label of v -1, -1, so -2. And again, I iterate, go here. And eventually, I arrive at a corner with minimal label, because each time I decrease the label by -1, and this vertex here with minimal label is connected to the root. Okay, and very easy to see that this is, well, the length of the path that you get is equal to this, and it's equal to the distance between the vertex I started from and partial d. I should not say the root, it's partial d. No, I prefer to call the root the root of the tree. Here what I mean is that I hit this extra vertex partial d. Okay. So this is what I'm going to call a simple geodesic. Well, in fact, I get all geodesics, in fact, to partial d. There is some choice in the sense that when I arrive at a corner of a vertex, I can proceed to go to the next step, to iterate. I can choose any corner of the new vertex I have arrived at to continue. But okay.
Sorry, can you recall how did you choose? You constructed this red tree, the red quadrangulation, but you also had to choose a special point because it is pointed. So how did you choose the point?
So, you remember in the construction I added this extra point here, partial d. That's going to be the distinguished vertex in my quadrangulation here, pointed.
So your distinguished point is
this one, yeah. I also need, because it's rooted, I also need to specify an oriented edge. I say that this oriented edge is the first red edge I construct here, well, from the first corner of the root of the tree. Okay, so the first one constructed here. And I need to choose the orientation, and this is why I need this epsilon +1 or -1. Okay?
So this formula, it is completely generic. It holds for any v. Right?
This formula is for any v. Yeah.
In your picture, v corresponds to maximum.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. It's because I wanted a longer path. You're right. Yeah. It works for any v. Yeah, you can. Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I can take v here, for instance. Okay, do this and this. Each time you decrease the label by +1, and eventually you arrive at partial. Okay. Other questions? Okay, so before I proceed to something different, the last comment is that, well, this looks like a combinatorial trick. When you see that for the first time, you think, well, it works for quadrangulations, but it's really a miracle, and so on. And but really, there is something deep in that bijection, and there are similar codings by trees for more general planar maps. So really, there is a kind of general property which is not fully understood, in my opinion, which is the fact that this planar structure of the planar map, you can always code it in some sense by a tree. Okay, so there's always a hidden tree structure. Okay, and this has been studied by many people. Okay.
Can you change the corner? I mean, there are at least two further paths to partial of the same length. So are they also geodesics, or you should stay in the same corner?
Well, what I said maybe too quickly is that each time when here you start from any corner of V, okay? So then you reach another vertex, which may depend on the corner you start from, of course. And then at this vertex, you can again choose any corner if you want. Okay?
You can change the corner, right?
Yeah, you can change the corner.
You will have.
This will still give you a geodesic.
I mean, yesterday you showed that basically all planar maps are in bijection with quadrangulation.
Yeah.
So I can just encode them there.
You're right. You're right. You're right. Okay. So, but yeah, one could do that. But for instance, if you deal with triangulations, it's not very interesting to transform a triangulation into a quadrangulation and then to code the quadrangulation as I explained here. You can have a more direct bijection. The idea is that something which is very important is this property of distances. I'm going to use it a lot. And if you replace a general planar map with the associated quadrangulations, the distances are not the same. And it's an interesting question, in fact, to compare the distances. Okay, so you lose something when you replace by the quadrangulation. Yeah. But otherwise, you are right. Yeah. Okay. So I should mention that so these more general codings have been studied by a number of people, and in particular, there is a very nice paper by Boutier, Di Francesco, and Dieter about 10 years ago, developing such bijections. Okay? And I can mention that these guys, in fact, are theoretical physicists. Okay? They are not really specialists of combinatorics or of probability. So it's just to tell you that this area, it looks like very pure mathematics, combinatorics, and so on, but it's also of interest in physics. Okay. So let me come now to the second part of the lecture. I will discuss scaling limits of trees. Okay, so, well, the idea, well, what we said yesterday, that we start from Qn, which is uniformly distributed over this set Qn dot. Because you have this bijection, okay, you can associate via the bijection a label tree. I will call it tau n ln v belonging to tau n. And this will be, of course, because this is a bijection, if you choose this one uniformly, this one will be chosen uniformly over Tn. And what I want to do first is that to understand what happens when n tends to infinity to this object here, okay, to the coding object. And then, of course, there is some work to come back to understand what happens to Qn, but it will be easier, this is what I explained yesterday, to understand first scaling limits for trees. Okay? And to begin with, I will consider only the tree structure. Okay? So because of what I said earlier, tau n is uniform over the set of all plane trees. Okay, so essentially we want to understand what the shape of a tree chosen uniformly at random in the space of all plane trees with n edges. Okay, and then there is a way of representing such a tree. So I'm again going to use a bijection, but in some sense we go to the quadrangulation to a tree, and then I'm going to go to a tree from the tree to something even simpler. But this is going to be useful. Okay, so yesterday I introduced, I think, something which I called the contour sequence of the tree. So this is very, very simple. You just you have your tree. Let's consider a simple tree. It's always the same game you play. You start from the root, Okay, and you move around the tree and you record the vertices that you meet. Okay, so this one is always the empty set. This one is always the first vertex of the empty set. And, well, the last one is okay. And I'm going to define something which I will call the contour function. Of tau n. This will be the function c tau n of I, which is the, recall this notation, this is the generation, the height, if you want, of the vertex u and I. Okay, so this is defined for I between 0 and 2n. Okay. So I can do a picture if you want. So what you do, you of course you start from the root which has height 0, so you start from 0, then you go up once, you go down, you arrive here. I go then to a vertex here at height 1, to a vertex at height 2, one at height 3, and then I go down like this. Okay. I don't have enough space. Yeah, it's okay. Okay. So this is, if you want, the contour function. And it should be very clear that, well, if I start from a tree and associate this function, this is indeed a bijection. Okay? Once you know this function, you can also recover the tree. Well, maybe we'll see that again later. This is 0, sorry. Okay. And that kind of function that we get here, with steps of +1 or -1. This is what people in combinatorics call a Dick path. Okay, so sequence x0, x1, x2n. You require that x0 equals x2n equals 0, that xi is non-negative for every I, and that the increments are +1 or -1. Okay, so xi minus xi minus 1 equals 1 in absolute value. Okay. So if you want, it's a discrete function of this type. And essentially what I explained is that there is a bijection between Tn and a set of all Dick paths of length 2n. Okay? So this is, the bijection is just, I start from the tree, I construct a contour function, and I get a Dick path. Okay? So this is very elementary. You can find this in any book on combinatorics, and it's so very easy to see. Now there is another way of looking at a Dick path, which is to view this as a random walk, or more precisely, at an excursion of a random walk. Okay, so I will write Sk, saying K positive, for simple random walk. So simple random walk on Z, this means that it has jumps of +1 or -1 with probability 1/2. And I'm going to introduce the heating time of -1 for this random walk. Okay. And what I say is that if I look at the path of my random walk before time 2n, conditionally on the event that I hit -1 at time 2n plus 1, while this is also uniformly distributed on Dick paths. of length 2n. Okay? It's more or less obvious. You can just compute the probability of any possibilities. It's just the same probability. Because you always have +1 or -1 with probability 1/2 at each step. And so this means that this object here that you get from as the contour function of a uniformly distributed tree with n edges, you can also view it as, well, a random walk, say up to the first heating time of -1, and you truncate it at time 2n here. Condition on the fact that the heating time of -1 is 2n + 1. Okay, so maybe I can just okay. So this is a very simple observation, but I'm going to use it to understand now the behavior of the contour function of my uniformly distributed tree with n edges. So the idea is very simple. We just have here a condition random walk, and essentially we can use Donskoy's theorem. So maybe I can state a proposition. Proposition says that if I look at my contour function, I normalize it suitably, so it's the same normalization, if you want, as in the central limit theorem, of course. So here, if you prefer, I could take the integer part, or either you take the integer part, or you maybe it's better to take linear interpolation, so that your function c, or I should not write it this way, it's c tau n of 20. Sorry, that's what I want to with my notation here. So you interpolate between integer values of the parameter to have this defined for any real here. Okay. And this converges in distribution as n tends to infinity to a limiting object, which is the Brownian excursion with length 1. Okay. So this is not, of course, surprising, because what I told you is that from the considerations that are above, this contour function has the same distribution here as this object here, so 1 over square root of 2n s at time, say, 20. Conditioned on the heating time of -1 to be equal to n + 1. So in some sense, you take a very long excursion of your random walk, because n is going to tend to infinity, and a very long positive excursion of your random walk, and you normalize it as usual here, and you get a convergence in distribution to a Brownian excursion. Okay? So is everything clear in the notation? Okay. So the fact that you have this identity distribution, this follows from what I said above. Taking here, this C to n is uniformly distributed over a Dicke path with length 2n, so it has the same distribution as this object here. Okay, so maybe not everybody is familiar with the Brownian excursion with length 1, or with duration 1. So basically, you get a random curve like this that starts from 0 at time 0 and also ends at 0 at time 1 and stays positive in between. And of course, there are several ways of constructing this object. You can use the general excursion theory and the Ito process of excursions and so on. I will give a description which is more, in some sense, more elementary. Something you can do, you can compute explicitly the finite dimensional marginals of this random function. So of course, it starts from 0 and it ends at 0. So I need only to look at values T1, Tp between 0 and 1. So if I want to consider the distribution of ET1, etc., ETP, it has a certain density. This density will involve two functions. The first one is, I call it by Q, I will define it. Okay? It's Qt1, okay, so let's say it's a density f of x1, xp. We will have first Qt1 of x1. Then you have another function which I call p star t2 minus t1 of x1, x2. P star t3 minus t2 of x2, x3, and so on. The last one is p star tp minus 1 of xp minus 1, xp. And finally, you have q1 minus tp of xp. Okay? So I need to tell you what are these q and this p star. So for this, it's better to introduce the usual Brownian transition density. So if pt of x, so this is 1 over square root of 2 pi t exponential minus x2 over 2t. So for instance, qt of x is just x over t pt of x. This is for t positive, of course, okay? And p star t of xy is just pt of xy minus pt. No, sorry. It's pt of y minus x minus pt of y plus x. So this is for xy positive, of course. And this is for x positive too, okay. Okay, so this can be interpreted, if you want, as transition density for Brownian motion killed when it hits 0. Okay, so if you use a kind of a reflection principle, you see that you get this p star. Okay, so basically this means that, okay, you at time t1, say suppose t1 is here, while you have a certain density. Okay, we have a certain density for your Brownian excursion, but then between time t1 and time t2, for instance, while your process is going to evolve like Brownian motion, but conditioned, in some sense, not to hit 0. It has to stay positive. So this is why you recover something which is the transition density of Brownian motion killed when it hits 0. Okay. So these are classical formulas. You can find them, for instance, in the book by Revue-Zanier, in many other places.
Does it mean it's Markov process or not?
It's Markovian, yeah. Yeah, you see it's Markovian on this, but it's time inhomogeneous Markovian, okay, because the transition density depends. Yeah, okay, so. So I did not say it, but this convergence is in a functional sense. Okay, so this convergence in distribution is in the space of continuous function from 0, 1 into R. Okay, you can take a expected value of any bounded continuous function on this space, on this functional space of this quantity. It converges to the same expectation for the Brownian excursion. Okay, so maybe I want to give a hint of how this is proved. It's not surprising, but it's not, okay, it's not so easy to prove. You cannot get it as an immediate consequence of the classical invariance theorem, if you want. So just to give you an idea of the proof, so I will do it only for finite dimensional marginals and even to begin with for one-dimensional marginals. So you just proved that.
Is this formula Ptx minus plus? Are you sure it's here minus? Yes.
Yes, this one.
Maybe this plus.
No, it's minus.
No, it's
Exactly minus.
It's minus, yeah.
Minus.
This is a minus, yeah. No, it's very important.
Why it's positive?
Why it's positive? Because x, y are positive here, okay? So this quantity is greater than this one. And this is a decreasing function of x. Like x larger, it's smaller, okay? So this quantity, well, I can tell you where this comes from. I mean, just you take your Brownian motion, okay? And you want the probabilities, it starts from x, that it is at y at a certain time, but without hitting 0, okay? And you look at the probabilities that it does that, but with hitting 0, okay? But if it hits 0, you just use a kind of reflection here. This will be the same as the probability that you go to minus y, okay? So basically, well, I don't know if my explanation is clear, but this is the probability that you go from x to y without any constraint. This is the probability that you go from x to y, but after hitting 0. And you don't want that, so you subtract it. Okay. Clear? Okay. So, one-dimensional marginals, I just want to fix t between 0 and 1 and to check that 1 over square root of 2n, this, well, so I do it with a random walk. Let's put here integer values, let's say. So this converges in distribution to it. Okay? And how do you do that? Okay, so it will be convenient to have a probability measure under which S0 is equal to a certain number L. Okay, so I want to start my random walk here from any integer value, if you want. Okay, so I say it starts from L under PL. Okay, and then there are two ingredients. The first one is the so-called Kemperman formula, which is telling you that you can compute the distribution starting from L of the heating time of -1. This is equal to L plus 1 over K times the probability that your random walk at time K is equal to -1. Okay? I say you compute it because, of course, you can compute this. You know explicitly the distribution of your random walk is just a kind of binomial distribution. Okay? But then you also have the distribution of the heating time of -1. So capital T is always this. Okay? Okay? And this is true for any L is non-negative. Okay? Here. Okay? And so I don't know if you've seen this formula. It's a very useful formula. In fact, it works in a more general setting for random walks which have negative jumps only of size -1, okay, which holds here, of course, but it could be applied to more general random walks. So the reason is that if you want, you start from L and you look at the, okay, this is your random walk, say up to time K, K is here. And essentially what I'm saying is that this event here is contained in this one. Okay? But of course, this is a strict subset of this one. Here I'm saying that the first time when I am at -1 is K, here I'm only saying that at time k, I am at -1. Okay? So the events are different, but still what you can do, if you permute cyclically the increments of your random walk, you count how many times this event will be satisfied, okay? Knowing that at time k you are at level -1. Okay? So you argue on this event, and you check that if you permute the increments of your random walk, there are exactly L+1 choices of the permutation. You permute them cyclically. There are L+1 choices that give you this event here. Okay? And there are k choices of permutations. Okay, maybe I should not say too much about that, but it's not at all a difficult result. And the other result one can use is the local limit theorem, which is basically telling you that, for instance, if you look at the probability, so starting from 0, that your random walk, say at time n, is equal to nx, or maybe I will put here also at time ns, say, okay? Okay, so there is an issue because of parity, okay? So I should put here nx or nx+1, okay? Because it depends on parity, so like this. Okay? So you multiply this by square root of n. This converges in distribution, while to essentially the Brownian density which is there. And there is a factor 2 because I have considered 2 values here. Okay. Okay. Thank you. It's x square root of n. Sorry for that. Okay. Okay.
It converges, not in distribution.
Oh. Thank you. Thank you, yeah, sorry. And this is uniform in X and uniform also in S, if S is greater than epsilon, say, or something like that. Okay, so we have good estimate for that. So it's a local limit theorem, but in this particular case, it's very easy to prove. It's just a Stirling's formula. Okay, so we use that. And now what I'm saying, I want to understand, well, this convergence. So I want to understand the probability that, say, Sk is equal to L, knowing that T is equal to n+1. Okay? So K is between 0 and 2n, say, for the moment. Okay? So I write this as usual as a ratio, probability that Sk is equal to L intersected T equal to n+1 divided by the probability that T is equal to Tn+1. And now I want to study this quantity. Okay? And what I'm saying that this probability how can I compute it? Well, I use the Markov property of my random walk. I say that it is the probability that, okay, at time k I am at L, I have not yet hit -1, so T is greater than k, times the probability for my random walk starting from L now, because I'm L here, that T is greater than 2n+1 minus k. Okay, so it's just very easy application of the Markov property. And now, well, this quantity, I can rewrite it. It's the same as twice the probability starting from L that T is equal to k+1. Okay? So why is it true? Well, what is this event here? I start my random walk from 0. I want it, say, to be at L here, at time k, without hitting -1 before time k. And now you just do a time reversal argument. You look at your random walk in this direction, okay? And you see that you have a random walk starting from L, okay, which is conditioned to be at 0. You want it to be at 0 at time k. But you can also say, well, there will be with probability 1/2 an extra step here of -1, so that we will have this t equals k plus 1. Okay? So the 2 comes from the fact that you have this extra step here with probability 1/2. Okay? Okay, so it's just a simple argument. So you now see that you have expressed this probability only in terms of the distribution of capital T. Okay? And this we know by the formula which is there. And so we can rewrite this object. So let me call this Z star. So star is equal to, while you use this formula here, you use the formula that is above. Maybe I skip a little bit the detail. What you get an L plus 1 squared here because of this L plus 1 here. And you get 2 also. And you get probably factor 2n plus 1 minus k also. And you have to, no, 2n plus 1. And you have to divide when you replace this by k plus 1, 2n plus 1 minus k. And you get the probability that, so I have this term here. So PL that S k plus 1 is equal to -1. Here you get PL that S 2n plus 1 minus k is equal to -1. And when you divide, because you have this term, you get P that S 2n plus 1 is equal to -1. Okay. So now you just have to play with this, and maybe I can continue here. What you do, well, you want, now you use the scaling, okay? So you take k equals the integer part of ns, and you take L equals x square root of n, or x square root of n plus 1. There is always this parity issue. And you substitute these values here in this object. So you think, well, so what happens, for instance, so L is going to be of order x square root of n. You have a square, so you will get x square. K is going to be, no, maybe it's 2ns I want to take, excuse me. Let's do it with 2n, it's better. Okay. Not so important. You will have 1 over s here, 1 minus s, because of this term here. There are constants. I forget the constants here. Okay, there's a constant here if you want. And if you take the ratio of these probabilities, you use the local limit theorem. So you use this result here, and so you see that you will get something like ps of x. P1 minus s of x. And in fact, the powers of n have to cancel. So in fact, you multiply this, say, by square root of n. Okay? Then the powers of n cancel. Then you have a certain constant here. And you can trust me, okay, I'm not doing the complete calculation, but it's very easy to do. So this constant that you get in the end is something like 4 square root of 2 pi. And here you recognize my function q, which was here. You get qs of x, q1 minus s of x. Okay. Aha. I realized that I forgot a constant here, in fact. I'm sorry for that. But there is a constant which is twice square root of 2 pi here. Okay. So it doesn't matter. Okay, you have to choose the proper constant, of course. Well, So now it's okay because what you get here is essentially twice the probability, well, twice the density if you want, so f of x. Okay. If you take just one value here, if you take p equals 1, okay, you don't have all these terms, and you have only this qt of x times q1 minus t of x, which is what you get here. Okay. So this is density of ES. Okay? And so remember what was star? It was this quantity. So this is telling you that the probability that S, so at this case, so 2ns equals x square root of n or x square root of n plus 1 converges to this if you multiply it by square root of 2n. Also, I should have taken 2n everywhere. Okay. So this is in fact, and I forgot the conditioning here. Condition on the event that t equals 2n plus 1. Okay, I had the conditioning here. Okay, so this is in fact a local version of what I wanted to prove. I wanted to prove this. Okay. And so here I get a stronger form. I get a kind of local limit theorem which is stronger than what I announced. Okay. Okay, so maybe I did too many calculations, but I wanted at least to do some probability. So this is just for one-dimensional marginals, but I would have liked to do the more general case, say, at least of two-dimensional marginals, but I'm not going to do it. It takes too much time in the end. But it's really not more complicated. You can, just by very elementary considerations, you can, instead of taking one time here, you can take 2 times. You apply twice the Markov property of your random walk, and you can analyze everything. You use only this Kaplan formula and the local limit theorem, and you get what you want. Okay. Is this clear, roughly? Or is there any question?
Maybe can you say whether it is diffusion or not, this process?
Oh,
is it a diffusion?
You mean the Brownian excursion?
Yeah.
Well, it depends what you call a diffusion. It's a Markov process. It has a
diffusion process that is characterized by a shift, local shift, and local. You
can write a stochastic differential equation for the Brownian excursion, but it's not very nice because you have to have a drift that pushes you here, that blows up when you come to 1. Yeah, sure. But you can do it, in fact. I could not write it for you, but you can do that. Yeah. Okay, so this gives you an idea of the proof of this result. And of course, it's not enough to prove convergence of finite dimensional marginals. You need well, you need to prove tightness also, but tightness is not so difficult. Okay, I do not have time to give the argument, but it can also be done rather easily. Maybe just to show you something interesting that you can derive from this convergence. Well, you can look at the maximal value of the processes. And what is the maximal value of the contour function? If you remember its definition, it's very easy to see that it is the maximal height in your tree. Okay, so let's say h of tau n be the maximum of the generation of u belonging to tau n. So this is just the usual notion of the height of a tree. And it turns out that this is the same as the maximum of the contour function. It's also very easy to see by definition. And so what you get is that if you normalize the height of tau n by square root of 2n, this converges in distribution when n tends to infinity to the maximum of the Brownian excursion. Okay, it's just a direct consequence because the maximum is a continuous functional for the topology and continuous function. Okay? So you get this formula, and this is it tells you that if you take a plane tree with n edges uniformly at random, typically its height is of order square root of n, and you have a limiting distribution, in fact, for the height scaled by square root of n. Okay, and it's interesting to one can compute the distribution of this object. So maybe a remark. There is a formula for the probability that this maximum is greater than x. It's not a very nice formula, but still I write it for you. It's in the form of a series, okay? Twice the sum from k equals 1 to infinity of k square x square minus 1 e to the power minus 2k square x square, okay? So, well, it's not really explicit, but this formula is known. And what is it? Well, I think it was proved by Chung a long time ago. Okay? And it's interesting in this story that this convergence has been proved already by combinatorists. It's a paper by Flageolet and Odlyzko. I think it's something in 81, something like that. And of course, they did not prove the convergence to this quantity. They proved the convergence in distribution towards the distribution given by this formula. Okay? So it was a completely different method. It was an analytic method. And later, of course, people recognized that the limiting distribution was the maximum of a Brownian excursion. Okay? But it's a nice...
Not really. They can compute analytically.
It was completely analytic. It was a combinatory computing generating functions and so on. Okay, so that kind of result gives you a means of reproving things in a more probabilistic way. Okay. Now these people are not really they were not really specialists of probability, more of combinatorics. Okay, so maybe what I want to do today, in the end of the lecture, I want to explain to you that. Well, you can reinterpret this proposition in terms of convergence of trees, okay, in the Gromov-Hausdorff sense as we saw yesterday. Okay, so this is, if you want this proposition, it's just telling you that if you take this contour function, which is a way of coding a coding function of the tree, it converges to something. But we want to say that the tree itself converges. And for this, we have a notion, this notion of Gromov-Hausdorff convergence. Okay, so this is what I will do next. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to give you a kind of interpretation in terms of trees. So for this, I need to explain to you that a function of this type can be viewed also as the contour of a certain tree. Okay, so you can view also a function like the Brownian excursion as coding a tree. And for this, I start from a function g. Well, like the Brownian excursion, it's a function defined on the interval 0, 1 with values in R+. It's supposed to be continuous. And for convenience, it starts and ends at 0. Okay? So, for the moment, this can be any function. So imagine a function like this, maybe not a too complicated one to start from. Okay, that's enough. This is my function g of t. And now I'm going to say that there is a tree hidden in the graph of this function. And there are several ways of defining this tree. So maybe I first give the formal definition. Okay, so if I pick S and T in the interval 0, 1, I will call mg of St. This will be the minimum value of G. For R between S and T, and just going to define it to be symmetric, so it will be the same as mg of Ts. Okay. Okay, I take this definition. I define something which is a kind of candidate to be a metric. dg of St. This will be g of S plus g of T minus twice mg of St. Okay, so this is what people call a pseudometric. So what does it mean? It means that it satisfies all axioms of a distance. Well, if S equals T, you find 0, this is obvious. It's symmetric, it's also obvious. It satisfies the triangle inequality. It's maybe a little less obvious, but if you think of it, it's not hard to see that it satisfies also the triangle inequality. The only thing that does not work is the fact that you can have S different from T and dg of St equals 0. Okay, so it's not really a metric. For instance, suppose that S is here, T is here, in such a way that the value of G is the same at S and at T. This is the same value here. And between S and T, the function G takes larger values like this. Okay? So for S and T, as on the figure here, clearly all these terms are going to be equal, so you get 0. Okay? So there is something you can do when you have a pseudometric. Well, you can just quotient the space. So my space here is the interval 0, 1 by the equivalence relation where you identify 2 points at distance 0. Okay? So say that S is equivalent to T. I put a G here to remind you that this equivalence relation depends on G. If dg of St is equal to 0, and this is equivalent, okay, to saying that g of S equals g of T equals the minimum of the function between S and T. Okay? And then you are going to take a quotient space. Okay? You are going to define Tg to be the quotient space of the interval 0, 1 for this equivalent relation. Okay? And then, if you, of course, you can use dg to induce a metric on this quotient space. Okay? So dg makes sense for elements of this quotient space. This is immediate because you've just quotiented with points at distance 0. So dg is a metric now of distance on tg. So maybe what I can explain a little bit more on the picture what we are doing. Essentially, we are drawing all horizontal chords like this below the curve. So these are all horizontal chords, and we below the curve, and we identify for each of these chords, we identify the 2 points which are the ends of this chord. Okay? So another way of saying that, imagine that you put some glue below the graph here, and you glue together points that see each other below the graph of the function. Okay? You imagine that you squeeze the graph onto itself, and points which are at the same level below the graph will be glued together. Okay? So in the end, if you do this gluing operation, this is the same as taking this quotient here. What you get is something which is a tree. Okay? I can show it for you, this tree. In fact, there will be a first segment of the tree up to the value of this minimum here. Then you will have a branching. So this branch here corresponds to this. Then you will have another segment coming going up to this minimum here. It's higher. And again, you will have a branching like this. Okay, and another branching here. So you see that in this particular, in this example, and this is true more generally, the branching points of your trees, they correspond to local minima here of your function. Okay? So this is the representation of the tree Tg. What I can say is that the tree associated with this function, so this object here, you can also represent it isometrically as this finite union of segments like this, equipped with a metric. So it's important to understand also that the distance between a point A here and a point B here is going to be the length of the path here, this length here, this plus this. Okay. Okay. So there is a proposition saying that Tg is a compact R3. Maybe I will say what I mean by that. So of course this is viewed as a metric space, okay? So it's Tg really equipped with this metric Dg is a compact R3 called the tree coded by G. Okay. And usually one also views this as a rooted tree. Okay, so if I will use a notation Pg for the canonical projection, okay? Projection from 0, 1 onto the quotient space. Okay, and by definition, I will say that Tg is rooted at Pg of 0, which I call rho. So if you want, I will imagine that there is a root here, which is at the bottom of the tree, my figure. And I can also define a volume measure. So volume measure on Tg equals push forward, or the image, if you prefer, of Lebesgue measure under pitch. Okay, so there is a natural volume measure on the tree also. So perhaps I need to explain a little bit what I mean by an R tree. So it's something which has been studied in metric geometry, but also in algebra. And it has been studied before appearing in probability theory. It has been studied in other areas of mathematics. So in fact, I will only consider the case of compact R tree, but this could be more general. This is a compact metric spaces such that, so let's call it T, okay, such that for every AB belonging to T, there exists a unique path. So unique is up to reparametrization. Well, you can always reparameterize your path. There is a unique path which is continuous, also I should have said, continuous and injective path from A to B. So there's just one path that goes from A to B, and moreover, the range of this path and its range is isometric to a compact interval, to a line segment if you prefer. Okay, so basically, so if you have an object, if you think of a connected union of segment like this, well, the properties are clearly satisfied because you pick any point A and any point B. If you want to go from A to B, staying on the tree, well, you don't have much choice. You have to do this. If you want it to be continuous and injective, 1 to 1. Okay? And moreover, the distance is chosen in such a way that this set of points here is in fact isometric to a line segment, to the line segment 0, the distance from A to B, if you want. Okay? So basically, you should think of a compact R3 as an object like this, made as of a connected union of segments. Okay? You can have many of them if you want. The metric you put on it is the one I explained. The distance between A and B here is going to be the length, okay, of this path here. Okay, it's clearly defined. And of course, you want it to be a tree, so that you cannot have a cycle. This is forbidden, for instance. Okay. Otherwise, this would violate this property. Okay. But so typically, objects of this type are compact R trees. Of course, this is not the most general case, because you can have something more complicated. You can add many branchings. You can have infinitely many branchings. Well, of course, preserving, you need to preserve the compactness. And, but basically, any compact R tree can be approximated by a union of segments like this one. Okay, so I'm not going, of course, to prove this. You can look at the reference I gave at the beginning of the lecture if you want to see the proof. It's not very difficult. I think what is important is to understand the intuition I explained on the picture there. But now I'm going to apply this to the Brownian excursion. So you can view this as coding a tree. Okay, so the tree is constructed exactly by these prescriptions here. And essentially what happens with the Brownian excursion is that it has infinitely many local minima. Okay? And the set of local minima is dense, in fact. And so it's like Brownian motion. And so essentially, as I explained there, you will have infinitely many branching points. So you get a complicated tree if you look at the tree coded by the Brownian excursion. But still, you can define it, okay? And this is what people call the CRT, continuum random tree, is the tree coded by a Brownian excursion E. Okay, so it's random because I start from a random coding function, so I got a random tree. So I still have 5 minutes, maybe to finish today. Maybe I want to restate this proposition in a different way. So this will be a corollary. Well, the consequence of this is that if you look now at the set of vertices, so in the way I defined the tree, tau n was just the same as the set of vertices, but maybe for convenience, I will still write V of Tn. So this is set of vertices of tau n. I'm going to equip this with a metric, which will be 1 over square root of 2n, the same as here, times the graph distance. Okay, so this is the graph distance on the tree. The tree itself is a graph, so you can define the graph distance. And I view this now again as a compact metric space. I say that this converges in distribution as n tends to infinity, well, but precisely towards the CRT which I have defined there. So this is, okay. So in which sense this converges in distribution? Well, in the space which I introduced yesterday of all compact metric spaces equipped with a Gromov-Hausdorff distance. Okay? So this is basically due to David Eldous in the beginning of the 90s, but it was not formulated this way. Well, essentially, Eldous proved a more general case of this, and we will see that this implies this corollary. Okay? And, okay, so in some sense, this is close to the kind of thing we want to get for random planar maps, convergence in the Gromov-Hausdorff distance. Okay? But here, of course, we are only dealing with trees, not with planar maps. Okay? So it will be much more difficult to have it for planar maps. Okay? So why is this result true? Well, essentially, we are going to interpret this object here also as a tree coded by a certain function. So introduce, okay, so let me set Cn of t to be this function here, okay? 1 over square root of 2n, C to n. Okay, and so we know that, okay, so okay, for instance, I can use a square code representation theorem just to transform this convergence in distribution into an almost sure convergence. Okay, so what I know is that there is convergence in distribution here. If I use a square code representation theorem up to replacing my trees to end with trees which have the same distribution, I can assume that there is an almost sure convergence. So this is almost sure in a strong sense. Okay, so it's really saying that the soup well, this is a uniform norm. This tends to 0 almost surely. Okay. And now I'm going to observe two things. The first thing is that if I look at the tree coded by this Cn, so here I use the notation t coded by a function g. I can use this function Cn to code a tree. Okay, and so I have with a certain distance. I say that it is close to this object here. Okay, and close means in fact at Gromov-Hausdorff distance, which is smaller than what can do, for instance, 1 over square root of 2n. So why is it true? So remember, okay, maybe I can erase that. So you start from a tree to n. So let's take a very simple one. It doesn't matter. So suppose this is our tree to n. And what I'm doing here, I'm rescaling the graph distance. So this means that you can imagine that all these edges have lengths 1 over square root of 2n. Okay? Okay? And now you look at the contour function. So it was this function. For this tree. So this is C to n. And in fact, if I rescale using my scaling there, okay, I will have the interval 0, 1 here, and the steps will be of size 1 over square root of 2n. Now, if you start from this function and if you you construct the associated tree, as I explained here, you see that you will exactly come back to the original tree. Okay, if you go to TCN, you will, when you do this gluing procedure I explained to you, this segment here is going to be glued to this one is going to be glued to this one. You remember all the horizontal curves and so on. TCN will be exactly the tree I started from. The difference is that here, the tree is a discrete object. It's just a collection of all vertices. Okay? Here it's what people call sometimes a metric graph. I have put segments between my vertices. But otherwise, it's the same object. And you see very easily, but you can embed, of course, a set of vertices here on the tree. You can embed it here. And so just by the definition of the Gromov-Hausdorff distance, you see that here I should not have put, should have put dashed lines if you want. Okay? And you see that this object here, if you want, it's a subset of this one, a finite subset of this one, and the Hausdorff distance between this subset and the whole tree here is bounded by 1 over square root of 2n. Okay? So even I could take half. So this is the first thing you need, and the second thing, I'm going to be brief. Second thing you need is the fact that this coding operation depends continuously on the function g. Okay? So you need a lemma, which I will not have time to prove, but maybe tomorrow. Maybe I will do it tomorrow. So lemma, if you look at the Gromov-Hausdorff distance between the tree coded by a function g1 and a tree coded by a function g2, this is bounded above by twice the norm of g1 minus g2. So this is a soup norm, okay? G1 and g2. So I don't prove that for the moment. Maybe I could come back to that tomorrow. It tells you that this tree coded by a function depends continuously on the function g. And as a consequence, if you look at this tree Tcn, you look at its Gromov-Hausdorff distance from the tree coded by the Brownian excursion. So you get this is bounded above by 2 times the uniform norm of Cn minus E. And precisely, I told you that this tends to 0. Okay? And tends to infinity. Okay? So you see that essentially to get the corollary, you just say, well, this space here is close to this one, and this one converges to the tree coded by a Brownian excursion. So this gives you the convergence you want. Okay? Here it gives you, of course, an almost sure convergence, but it's because I have used the Skoro code at this point, okay, to get almost sure convergence. Okay? Okay, it's time to stop. Thank you.